give us an informational presentation on the patterns of predation of elk livestock. Thank you, Doug.
Yes, Mr. President, members of the Commission, Director Nesbitt. This next presentation is from Assistant Professor at UC Berkeley, Dr. Arthur Middleton. And Dr. Middleton is a research associate with the Buffalo Bills Center. And his research, as you mentioned, is on those patterns of predation in the Yellowstone ecosystem. And Dr. Middleton has a long history in Wyoming, and particularly in the Cody region. And he started in 2007, identifying some long-distance migrations into that southeast corner of Yellowstone. He's done a bunch of groundbreaking work on those migrations and the difference between migratory and non-migratory elk. And so we really value our partnership with Dr. Middleton and his team. And with that, I will turn it over to him and let him get started.
Well, thank you, Doug, and thank you, Mr. President and members of the Commission, for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here and talk about some projects on large carnivore ecology and predator-prey interactions right around here. And I want to say right up front how I appreciate your support in the past and just now to research projects of the sort that I and colleagues work on in Wyoming, and your consideration to these specific projects I'll introduce today. So I first came to Wyoming about 12 years ago for grad school. I interviewed 5 times with Game and Fish and Fish and Wildlife Service and UW, and I managed to hide the fact I had never seen any of the wildlife in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem before, from elk to wolves to everything I now study. I hope I can speak with a little bit more footing today, now that I've had the chance to work here for a while. The context for what I want to talk to you about today is the really extraordinary recovery and expansion of large carnivores in many areas, and especially in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And I highlight the greater Yellowstone ecosystem not just because it's where we are today, and it's important to Northwest Wyoming, but because really now the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, partly because of these recoveries of these species, harbors the most diverse assemblage of large mammals, including large carnivores, of almost anywhere in North America. And so that's been a major historic kind of wildlife recovery. But of course, it's also brought incredible challenges for wildlife science and management professionals and conservation community, and drawn intense interest from a diverse public. And so the projects I'm going to talk to you about today are in this context. And I and my group in particular, and on collaborative projects I have had and continue to develop with the Game and Fish Department and others, have focused in a few areas. Longer term questions of interest are: how do large carnivores affect the behavior, distribution, and the abundance of managed prey, mostly ungulate populations? How do carnivores and other wildlife affect livestock and agricultural interests on multiple use lands? And so these are important questions to me and collaborators. And I also, and I'll kind of back this up with some background in the next little bit, really come to believe in the power of partnerships to leverage resources to work at these large scales on costly wildlife research, but also leave behind good relationships that contribute to the management solutions to some of the things we work on. And also just I've really come to appreciate the intense interest of the public in understanding these dynamics. And so those are things you'll see and hear me talk about in the context of any of our projects. A bit of background, first an outline for the presentation. I'm going to first provide some background, some insights from past work that I've been involved in this region, and some just general, kind of crude, but I think important observations about kind of the direction and of predator-prey research recent years in this ecosystem. I'll talk about some new research in collaboration with the Game and Fish Jackson region, some new research in collaboration with the Cody region, both of which involve collaborations with the large carnivore section of the Game and Fish Department. And so with that, I want to dive into a bit of background. The earliest work I've done on these subjects involved the ecology of the Clark's Fork herd, just out of Cody to the north and west of us here. And this is a herd about, I'm not up on the latest numbers, between 4,000 and 5,000 elk that sort of split among migratory and non-migratory cell populations. You're seeing here resident non-migratory elk GPS locations out on the Absaroka front, including over in Mark Mountain to the east here, which we heard about earlier. And then in black, the movements on the winter range of migratory elk in this population that winter kind of in the middle of the map there and move up into the upper Lamar River inside Yellowstone National Park in the spring and summer and into the fall. And then you're seeing overlaid the territories at that time of wolf packs that were of interest to questions about the changing ecology of the elk herd. And you can see those encompassing more of the migratory elk winter range than the residents. And so the big questions then were about why we were essentially seeing this population almost diverge into two distinct herds. You could almost say a migratory herd kind of more in the backcountry and this resident herd sort of burgeoning in the front country. And so I'm just showing you here calves per 100 cows. In black, you're seeing over a couple of decades this decline becoming increasingly steep of calf-cow ratios in the Clark's Fork elk herd. And so that was the concern to very low levels of a lot of concern to managers. And of course, you know, this decline coincides pretty roughly, as many people know, with will immediately know with the introduction of wolves into the system. And so outwardly, it's very intuitive that wolves are having a lot to do with the decline of calves in this herd. And we spent a number of years conducting various individual studies that kind of came together into a larger picture of changes in this herd. And you know, the head scratchers were that we knew pretty soon after starting the work that adult cow survival, even in the migratory subpopulation, was really quite high. They wouldn't die from much other than hunter harvest. Adult calf mortality studies in adjacent areas showed that both predation, and I'll talk more about this later, wasn't able to explain, you know, a decline of this magnitude in elk calf ratios. And we also had a major component of the work I'm just glossing over, asking about potential stress effects of wolves on the reproductive performance of elk cows, for which we found little or no evidence at all. And so we couldn't really explain the magnitude of this decline with the most obvious factor that people are interested in at that time. And to help understand why, what we really need to do is think about this herd's, not just its winter, but the year in the life of this herd. And so we began really thinking a lot about following this herd to its summer range and asking about what's going on when, in a sense, this herd is at its most vulnerable in the sense of having newborn calves, many of which are born up on the summer range after the arrival of elk, or at least arriving up there while they're still quite vulnerable. So what's going on up there? And what these studies showed was, when we kind of go back behind the wilderness curtain, you can see that, yes, wolves eat a bunch of elk calves, but they're greatly outpaced by bears, particularly grizzly bears, but both grizzly and black bears. And so the studies that were conducted on elk calf mortality showed about a 4-fold increase in the level of bear predation mortality in these areas since work that was done 20 years or so earlier. And so this is a multiple predator system that's driving a significant portion of the decline of these cat-cow ratios, with bears doing a lot of that. At the same time, we could also see that this run of hot and dry summers in the years preceding when we began that work really was affecting to some degree out pregnancy rates. And so fewer calves being born, and then the calves that were being born being consumed pretty quickly in the early weeks of life. So we're looking here at the period of green up, and what we could see just from space is a decline over a number of years in the duration of the green up. Important period nutritionally for these migratory elk up in the high country, and we could see that even prime age females were not becoming pregnant every year for several years during this work. So meanwhile, that's what's going on with the migratory elk in broad strokes. Resident elk are living high out in the front country. We saw about a quarter of that resident herd spending more than half of their summer in irrigated fields, where they get a huge subsidy to their reproduction and survival, and of course obtaining some benefits to their survival probability of lower predator numbers associated with management activity relative to carnivores, or just aversion, say, of grizzly bears to some of the areas where these elk are hanging out. So kind of these refuge effects that resident elk in this herd seem to be benefiting from, while migratory elk experience those other influences. And so there's some insights from Clark's work that inform how I think about the system going forward. And just picking a few here, just sort of lesson of caution when sort of singling out a particular carnivore in a multi-carnivore system. Sometimes we have to do that, or that's what we're interested in, or it's what's expedient in terms of research, or it's what the public's interested in, but it can be misleading, as we learned in the Clark's work. Prey migration is such a fundamental process, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but a lot of these herds that we're talking about are in very different places in different times of the year, and sometimes where they are one time of the year doesn't align with when we count and monitor them, in the other half of the year, and that creates a misalignment of our monitoring from important ecological goings on that affect these populations. And so behavior matters. Not as much in this herd, but in other studies, it's become pretty clear that there are some winter ranges where elk can sustain, can kind of hold their own in the presence of wolves and other carnivores in terms of survival, but the behavior can be really important. We can see, in a sense, if you will, bigger influences of behavior, of predators' presence on the behavior of these prey than, if you will, on the survival probability. So behavior was important, and related to that, I think we got a sense of these sort of refuges out in the front country, but that's an area that we really didn't get to explore. And I'd say we are going to have to think about it at a much larger scale, because many of the herds around the landscape are experiencing similar sort of subsidies and refuges from predation in some parts of their year-round range, and really different influences on others, and we should expect that to matter a lot to the distribution of these prey. Migration was incredibly important, and this is why you'll see me talk about it when I talk about specific projects. That's the Clark's Fork herd. I was aware of historic and other recent studies on individual herds around the system, but I was very curious to kind of, I couldn't, when you Google elk migration in this system, you couldn't find a map, and that was of great interest to me to understand that better, given how important it seemed to understanding the ecology of herds in the system. And so we collaborated widely with kind of everybody that might have data. We did new collaring, continue to do a little bit of this in different areas of the Greater Yellowstone. We were able to, for the first time with GPS, collaring, map out the year-round movements of many elk herds that are wintering out on the front country, and summering up in core areas of the system. And I should say, in many cases, using data that the Game and Fish Department or Montana or Idaho collected at significant expense and effort, but just hadn't been stitched together. And so we didn't do all this, but sort of we're trying to help stitch it together into that bigger picture. And so the reason I mention this is partly because I think it's helpful to frame up what I think are some of the research, some of the limitations to scientists and the public understanding of the interactions that we're talking about here. So in terms of published science that is tracked by media and becomes the story that people associate with elk and their predators, prey and their predators in this system, which has a huge influence on how we think about these systems from local to national to international levels. The vast majority of that comes from one fraction of one winter range of one of these elk herds in the northern herd of Yellowstone. Most of that work's focused on wolf elk interactions. And what you'll see here is the northern herd's pretty well-known decline in overall numbers over several decades. Those were introduced in 1995 and a steep decline. And so there's a lot of work that's been done on this, and clearly wolves play a significant role here, as well as bears and hunting that continues, of course, across the park line and Montana and other segments of this herd. But the challenge here that I want to point out, and the limitation I'm going to frame up, is we've pulled together the trend counts of all these other elk herds that are shown on the map, and you're looking at the northern herd here, which has this dramatic shift over a couple of decades. And then you're looking at all these other herds, the Jackson herd, the Cody and Clark's work, and Williams' work are down in here. And what I basically want you to take away from this is these, broadly speaking, very broadly speaking, these are populations of elk that share many of the same influences, but they're responding in quite different ways to those influences, and large carnivores are a really important one of those. And if you look at the calf-cow ratios of these herds, you would see a similar picture. You would see calf-cow ratios that are declining for some, but staying at levels that are pretty high, would make many game wardens around Clark's Fork very happy, or Chris Queen would be very happy to have 30, 35 calves per 100 cows, and you can have that in some parts of the system, even in the face of large carnivore predation. And I would argue it's almost as interesting to understand why an elk herd can be more robust to predation as it is to understand why an elk herd can be very sensitive to it and vulnerable to predation. So huge caveats here. I mean, in some ways, some of these herds you don't see declines because managers have backed off harvest to accommodate more carnivore predation, and that's lost hunter opportunity and so forth. And these obscure, local scale differences that are really important if you're outfitting in a particular drainage and so forth. But the point is, there's a lot of variation in the ways these herds respond to these shared conditions, with carnivores being one of the important things that they share. And so one of the issues, I guess, I would just say briefly, how applicable, how general is our understanding that we've been developing? What are the opportunities to strategically work in some of these other regions and build up a better understanding that moves away from whether or not carnivores are influencing populations to when, where, how strongly, and the kinds of those questions that's much more useful to local management herds. The other is how applicable is some of our understanding from, say, the northern herd of Yellowstone. This work here, it's incredibly important work. All I'm saying is it's led to a narrow understanding in other respects. How applicable is it to the larger landscape, which is occupied by 500,000 people, or larger areas of the West where these carnivores are actually interacting very closely with people, and with harvested prey populations, and with livestock, and with human activities that may distort the predator-prey interaction and create those kinds of refuge dynamics and things I mentioned earlier. So these are just some general observations that inform how I think about which projects we develop and emphasize from a scientific standpoint. And so just to say, back to the original kind of questions I highlighted and some of the other principles I offered, it's my kind of past 10 years of working on these topics and business of doing the projects that's kind of led me to these longer term questions and partnerships and linkage of science. I'm trying to find ways to link science to public understanding, not just the pages of journals and so forth. So next, I want to profile some new research in the Jackson region. Then I'll go to Cody, and I just want to say at the top, these are developing, evolving projects. So we're just getting a few components of these projects off the ground. There are other elements that haven't started yet. So preliminary information about objectives and a little bit of incoming data. So in the Jackson region, the way this work developed was, I'm going to talk about two pieces. One piece on the sort of ecology of the Jackson elk herd, and another piece focusing on the questions about the elk responses to gradients of predation and habitat and snow and other factors in the Vermont National Elk Refuge kind of zone, if you will. This developed originally as a collaboration with Grand Teton National Park. Together we established a 5-year partnership to better understand basically the recolonization of wolves into the southern Greater Yellowstone, or that portion of the southern Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. I'll show you in a minute. There's a tremendous amount of information that the Park Service has collected, but it hasn't sort of, and the wildlife folks there would say this themselves, hasn't really seen the light of day and been sort of analyzed in ways that they would like to see it. So some of this is really drawing on that wealth of existing information. Seasonal dynamics of wolf predation, influences of wolves, and other factors on elk distribution, productivity, especially winter distribution, and these questions about human influences on that predator-prey dynamic and the sort of formation of these refuges from predation and what that means for elk behavioral decisions. This work was developed through the Cooperative Ecosystem Studies units, and we then put the kind of ideas to other partners. Game and Fish had very strong interests in all of this work, and so that quickly became a partnership with the Jackson region and now the large carnivore section. Also strong interest from the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service, who we're working with on different aspects. And really it has been I used to be afraid of working in Jackson. A lot of different, parties involved in that part of the system. And it's just been a great set of collaborations and partnerships. I've been really impressed over the course of developing this work. Just to give you a sense of that wealth of information, keep on the left, I just sort of smack down all the wolf data that just Teton Park, not even including Game and Fish, and some old Fish and Wildlife Service data collected. It's just an immense amount of information. VHF data since 1998, GPS data since 2004, with more than 60 wolves and up to 6 packs a year, having one or more collars in them, with fine scale movement data collected, wolf denning and pup production data, predation patterns, data from a couple packs. Of course, this you can overlay with extensive elk movement data. People like Doug Vermeyer sitting behind me and others have been heavily involved in that over their careers. And so there's a wealth of information on the prey. And I think I have an underestimate here, about 160 individuals over the same time period for elk, as well as winter cow ratios, string counts, and some summer data. So there's just a wealth of existing data to work with. It's just that one caveat is it's a really rich information base, but it wasn't collected to do all the things that we're interested in doing. So it's going to take us some time to sift through which of our priority objectives we're really going to be able to nail and which ones we might need to supplement with new data. But just to give you a sense, this is just pulling, say, from 1 year, where were there 1 kilometer encounters between wolf, silver collared, and elk, and that's what you get from a bunch of packs, and that's a pretty sparse year. So there's a lot of information in there to ask important questions about the system with. New data collection on some of these latter objectives. This is where the department kind of came in and said, if you're doing this work, we'd really like some help zooming in on a portion of the herd between the Grogan and kind of the elk refuge. This winter, we had incredible work from Tim Mills and John Stevenson and others to get collars out in the packs of interest here. And so that's gone really well. And we've got field crews now, a Berkeley crew that's had a bunch of help from the Game Fish Department looking at these clusters of GPS locations to document predation so that we can study kill rates, prey selection, spatial patterns of risk. So they've been working since mid-January. They've looked at a few hundred predation or location clusters and identified 20 some. Now it's more probable possible kills, elk, moose, bison. So we're just starting to get that off the ground. In a tough winter in Jackson with the snow levels, but it's pushing through it. In the Cody region, questions about the effects of migration. The Cody herd is especially dramatic migration in the sense it has a much smaller resident component and a much larger migratory component. And so elk migration and the Cody herd really, to put finest possible point on it, it means all the most important prey sort of vacate a huge front country area in the summer, spring, summer, and fall. And there are long-standing questions in this system about what that means to carnivore predation, prey switching, and onto influences on livestock. So also questions about the ecology of livestock depredation. And to just give you a quick profile of this work. Again, this is new and evolving work. It's going to play out over the course of 5 years, at least, I think. It's a more challenging system in the sense that we're going to get higher levels of removal of carnivores, especially wolves, and the challenges of maintaining collaring and so forth. So sort of have to plan for a little bit more time to address some of these questions because of that and other reasons. First objective here is to evaluate seasonal patterns of wolf movement and predation, spanning the migration, how do movements and predation change seasonally, particularly in relation to migration, but also other seasonal and landscape factors. The second objective, and the third, get into livestock depredation. Spatial patterns and trends in depredation. What are the environmental drivers, the landscape drivers of depredation risk? Third objective, ecology of wolf cattle encounters and cattle responses to those encounters. This is work that we've been developing in close collaboration with the Game and Fish Department, based kind of in a field base at the Buffalo Bill Center in the West. I'll mention a little bit more about that in a moment. And with many of the ranches, particularly in the South Fork, which is shown, North Fork, which is shown to some degree in the Grable. some collaring that we got off the ground, again with huge assistance, really driven by Game Fish, Flynn Mills and others in the large carnivore section this winter. Really great collaring success. I think 11 satellite collars and 8 packs, including most of the sort of historically depredating packs of interest to us. And so just the orient, sorry the maps are different shapes and sizes and colors, but Cody, in a few years I'll have it all slicked out and everything, but we're just getting off the ground. But Cody, Southport, Northport, Grable here, so that's the collaring kind of success this winter. And again, we have a field crew here that's focused on the packs that tended to be depredating packs in the recent and also deeper packs, I guess, the Houlihan pack, the Carter Mountain pack, and the Grable pack. And so very similar, we're searching location clusters and documenting predation so that we'll have a base of predation on native prey, and then look at how that shifts in the summer and whether it shifts to increased risk on cattle and so forth. So they've been working since February 15th. Again, enormous assistance from the department, which we're very appreciative of. Got 120 clusters, number of kills identified, so just sort of getting off the ground there as well. And expect several more and more robust winter and summer field seasons in this case in the coming years. Livestock components. This is work that I just want to sort of give you an aside. It's partly linked to discussions, many informal, some more formal, in workshop like this one that I co-hosted a couple of years ago with some of the livestock producers in these areas, where when you ask the question of what kind of research topics on wildlife and habitat folks are interested in, one of the handful of high priorities was on better understanding kind of the patterns of depredation risk and the bigger picture of the ecology of livestock depredation. People understand these things obviously at the scale of their operation, but when we can look across a larger landscape, we have much more power to see influences we might not see at the smaller scale. And so there was strong interest in that. This was a fun event involving many of those ranches. And that sort of informed where we prioritized project development in this area since. The second objective here will take advantage of the long-term data set that the Game Fish Department has developed on carnivore livestock conflict, land carnivore distribution, cattle distribution, ungulate movement and distribution data from other sources, and probably use cattle collaring to estimate depredation rates in some of these areas. We're still developing that with a likely pilot season to test out with the Voodoo Ranch equipment and some of our options this summer before we expand the scope of that work in future years. Third objective kind of takes those patterns of risk and then would again use cattle collaring to ask questions about how cattle perceive, whether and how cattle perceive risk and respond behaviorally to that risk. And again, we'll be starting with a pilot season this summer. And so I just wanted to wrap up with just like broad kind of observations about anticipated hoped-for benefits of these developing projects. Information on carnivore influences and predator-prey interactions that's we know is desired by regional wildlife managers, and we've developed these projects in close collaboration and discussion with the regions and the wildlife biologists. And part of moving the needle from this kind of whether carnivores influence big game or not here or there to when, where, how strongly, what are some of the primary environmental drivers of the strength of those interactions, and developing further some of these important partnerships and public understanding. A lot of people to thank. It's sort of, I was just writing down, these projects have been even more complex than most projects I've involved in, and so just a tremendous effort, especially from the Game Fish Department. I mean, I'm not going to read everybody out, but you can just see many personnel have provided input and help and project planning, as well as many in the Park Service, the Forest Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and my group, and now a number of graduate students just stepping in to take the reins and help lead some of these specific projects. I just want to mention that as a part of this, we have a really, really key partnership with the Buffalo Bill Center here in Cody. That is what, as our work expands, not just on carnivore ecology, but ungulate migrations, that we have sort of a base, a field base here that can support multiple projects with vehicles and equipment and office and meeting space, and be a fiscal sponsor regionally, local contracts with outfitters and others in Wyoming. And so this is actually mostly funded by individuals and foundations in Northwest Wyoming to support our kind of longer term work here in the ecosystem. Project funding to date has come from a number of sources, a diversity of sources, from the Game and Fish Department, individual donors, to foundations, to sportsmen, and others. And with that, I just want to thank you again for your consideration of our work and your support to research, and hopefully I have enough time for any discussion you'd like to have. Thank you, Mr. President and members of the Commission.
Discussion. Dr. Middleton, I'd like to say a few things. I thought I recognized you up there, but didn't you conduct produce a documentary on migration? And did you present that at the Waterway in Cody?
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good documentary.
I mean, I should say I participated. I was a part of it. You know, my friend and colleague Joe Reese, photographer, did a lot of, you know, basically is responsible for almost everything that's cool about that. All the images. But yes, that's
a very good documentary. If anybody gets a chance to, you love it. I don't know if you remember that. Here in Cody. Yes, it's really good.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you for all you did.
Mr. President, I guess I'd just add real quick. We worked with Arthur, as he indicated, for many years, and he's really been willing to work closely with the department on answering both questions that have become intriguing to him, but also things that we've been asked about from our public and actually from the Commission. You know, just today we had a discussion with the Commission about quantifying impacts on big game from grizzly bears, and so that's the kind of work that Arthur can help us with. That's the kind of work he's done in the past. He talked about the work up in the Clark's Fork. That was some stuff that really helped us in a lot of ways explain some of the things that were happening when we had to dramatically reduce hunting opportunity in the Clark's Fork about 10 years ago. His work was able to help inform some of those decisions and help us explain why they had to be made. So it's been a good partnership, and we look forward to it continuing. You know, Dr. Middleton brings to the department opportunities like Hal Sawyer and Kevin Monty. We have enough folks to do a good job with managing and monitoring large carnivores, but not doing a whole bunch of this research. So that's what Dr. Middleton is currently bringing to the department. And so I look forward to continuing partnership.
Appreciate it very much. Sometimes these studies we pay for, we think we have a good idea of the outcome, but sometimes we have to suck it up and look at the final analysis and what the study recommends and make those decisions based on that. Appreciate all you do. You're really impressed with your document. Really good. Thanks. All you.
One of the things I saw in your early slides was the combined predatory influence of wolves and grizzly bear had a really kind of profound effect on Clark's work. Is anyone looking at that?
Well, it's a good observation in that.
Your studies are looking at wolves, but is anyone looking at the combined predatory effect of those two top-of-mind predators on wildlife?
Yes and no. I mean, in terms of what we really could do, the situation with the kind of listening status and who's managing grizzly bears, from my perspective, is pretty prohibitive. In fact, I get asked this question a lot about why bears more a part of this or that study. It's just it's a very different, I would say, less certain and less open system when it comes to bears for research of this nature. That said, there have been, sometimes what we have to do is be, I hate to use the word artful, but artful, but in an open way about collecting data, on one, and I'll give you an example. In the Clark's work, we were kind of able to borrow information that the Park Service had generated from overlapping area on sources of mortality to elk calves from multiple predators to make inferences in the modeling in just sort of a general sense about, where the calves are going, whose belly they're going into. So it's very challenging at this time to tackle sort of multi-predator questions in a single study, but we can try and pull in good work that's been done in nearby areas and answer some of these questions. There are studies in Yellowstone going on that are really now taking, and in Jackson, that have begun to pull together both wolf and mountain lion predation in winter on elk. And so I'd say we're kind of moving in the more explicit questions about multi-predator influences. But it's hard, frankly, politically, it's hard logistically. One of the things that's kind of interesting in the Cody region is, for example, sources about calf mortality. And when you start thinking about doing that work in thoroughfare, you got to get pretty serious about whether that's really going to be feasible and so forth. And we'll be sort of studying that question in this case. But this is a difficult. There are those other challenges, and then there's just the fact that these are challenging landscapes. It becomes very costly very, very quickly to mount some of these studies that truly account for all the variables we'd like to.
What I heard was you've gone out and borrowed, baked, installed, and however you get your data sets that exist out there. I mean, it seems to me we've got a lot of collared grizzly bears. Can we take that, if someone made it available to us, can we take that data and put it together with both data? I mean, you're the scientist.
Yeah, I'm kind of answer that question, Commissioner. I kind of want to defer to maybe Ben Thompson and others can talk about this in a much more expert way than I can, but there are also quickly issues about sometimes as bears are collared, but it's a whole other thing to be following them closely, documenting exactly what they're eating and conducting diet studies. And so there's a big lift to do that. There are also in some of the very areas where we might like to do that work, it's very challenging to collar and maintain collars on bears. And so I hope I'm not doing a hack job on answering this question, Dan, but I would say those are a few of the limitations.
I guess my question is, do we have GPS color? If you're looking at GPS, call them data spots or
Data.
GPS data spots where you have multiple GPS readings of a collared wolf, and so you believe that that's probably a kill site. Go check it out and find out if it is or it isn't. We have that same capability with our current collaring grizzly bears that we could feed to Dr. Middleton and have him analyze.
Well, it's sorry, President Commissioner Crank. It's a little different with the grizzly bear component because we try to maintain a sample of the across the ecosystem, so we're not focusing hard scale on one area. The benefit of collaring wolf packs is that you can get them collared and cover this entire area with a cluster analysis pretty well versus all the other carnivores we're talking about. Now, Arthur did allude to this, and it's something that we've discussed. If you want to get into the understanding of what's killing the animal, you should collar the prey species. But it's very logistically challenging to collar up neonates from the thoroughfare to the gray wolf. That's kind of what I was getting at, correct? Yeah. There are some GPS data that would be available, but it wouldn't capture the amount as well as the wolf data that being currently collected. But we have combined data sets, especially in that grow line area, all carnivores and prey species. So there are attempts to do that.
It appears you have to color a lot of cat out. That's not practical. The prey period is real short, that window, isn't it? Where they pretty much outrun it, isn't it? That time for...
Yeah, this is, Mr. President, this is a question we're discussing actively in relation to some of this work now is the practicality of mounting that kind of work. And so, some of the constraints are, Forest Service considerations and access to some areas that are wilderness, and captures need to happen. How quickly one needs to
That's something let me know. I mean, right now, we'll study Jackson, have collared wolves. And you're looking for GPS clusters to determine kills and what they may have killed in other woods.
Right.
Is there a component of that we have collared wolves as well?
Well, let me just step back and point out that in Jackson, most of the questions of strong interest in managers, Mr. Commissioner, are pretty winter focused. So in Jackson, at least with respect to what the region has, Park Service asked for research support on, I can kind of, not to say grizzly bears aren't important, black bears aren't important, but the primary question really is about these winter influences of the predators that are running around in the winter. The other is another more informal answer to your question, which is I've worked on projects involving wolves in Wyoming over a number of years, and that's been turbulent enough. You want me to take on grizzly bears too? That's the sort of the other. No, but that's kind of.
Mr. President, one thing I would add here, and I think that this is where I think I understand what Commissioner Frank's trying to go. There's a difference between going into the thoroughfare and looking at a cluster or a place where a grizzly bear may have spent a lot of time, and going in there in 1 or 2 days. Sometimes when you got 24 to 36 hours before it's gone, to be able to get into a place that takes 2 days on a horse or a helicopter, which requires permission from the Forest Service to land in the wilderness. I mean, those are the kind of things that the challenges I think they're trying to outline.
Well, Brandon, I fully understand that, but my question is much more simple, such as Dan has grizzly bear collar data in areas that would be accessible, or the Forest Service has it, or Park Service has it, or whoever has it. The question is, I understand the challenges of getting to the thoroughfare. I understand the challenges of studying sheep in the Wind River Range. accepting all that, if there's data out there, can we capture it?
I believe,
Try to draw some conclusions between, you know that the grizzly bears are whacking this many elk calves, and wolves are whacking this many, and so what is the combined effect of those top of the line predators, and particularly grizzly bears, because they're uncontrolled present.
so Commissioner, I think we will be able to find a way. I don't think we're going to be able to soon tackle those questions with, intensive new data collection of the kinds we talked about. I do think we'll be able to kind of creatively address in a cruder way some of those questions. So, for example, if we're documenting summer predation by wolves on elk calves and the rates that we see, kind of broadly speaking, just simply cannot explain a decline in recruitment of, can't get rid of 1,000 elk calves in a short period when we have a sense of wolf predation. We have some basis for inferring that, especially if we see that the nutritional condition, particularly the pregnancy rates of the herds, high, we can make some broad inferences about the role of bears, but we're not going to be standing on the firm ground we would be were we able to collect all the information we would want to. As far as information sharing, I think my perception is that when we can articulate a good need for information, a body of information that would be pertinent, as these studies develop, that almost everybody involved is willing to entertain those requests, and I think we'll be able to do that kind of thing as we go. I do want to mention, when it comes to the questions about livestock depredation, the data sets that exist at the Game and Fish Department encompass predation events caused by multiple predators. And so there are components of the work that are less, that allow us to get at those questions in multiple carnivores, and others where it's harder, but we have to pull in other data sources as we go.
Thank you. Any other questions? Dr. Miller, you said we need to be incredibly careful. We can't just blame the decline of Clark's work herd on the introduction of those. We have to look at migratory patterns. We have to look at summer bring-up conditions. We have to look at that's all I'm trying to get at. Is there a way to take what's there, what you're doing, Dan's doing, what the Park Service is doing, and combine all those together and try to draw some conclusions? But I understand scientists, you guys are incredibly careful, which is great. About drawing conclusions, but that's all I'm asking. Can we expand this, not just focus totally on blows? Can we look at what data may be available, understanding the difficulties of life and research? Yeah. Can't fly a helicopter into reserve there.
So, Commissioner, I think the short answer to that is yes, and the longer answer would involve there are inferences we would make that we would be much more cautious about the way we communicated them, or the strength of our, whether we hung our hat completely on them. That's about how the work develops and how we communicate our findings. The short answer is yes, we will be able to pull in some of the other data sources pertinent to other predators. And I also think this discussion will certainly, as we're working over the coming months and year, where we're still evolving this work, we'll take all of this into account.
Well, such as you can say cautiously, yes. Here. That's a great research opportunity. If someone comes on and says, okay, let's study that and quantify it. But top of the line predators, I think we need to look at everything.
One thing I'd add is, and Arthur and I have argued about this. We were friends, but we still argue about it. Going a route, the cost-specific mortality route from the prey, or going through the carnivore aspect. And to get the information across the Pacific route is really logistically potentially impossible. But as this evolves over the summer, some of the data that's going to be collected is going to identify parturitions. So it's going to be able to look at the feasibility of getting to these areas. Can we actually capture these calves in that short window? So it is a continually evolving process. Yeah. And the door's not shut. We're talking with the regional people and UC Berkeley and in our section. I mean, I think we know the limitations and the reality of what can be done now, but as we know more, maybe there can be more added.
I should add, I'm very glad, Commissioner, that Dan mentioned the parturition site. So things that the Cody region, well, because of exactly what you were asking, this is something we've talked about a lot. We have talked about this question of whether we can include study of elk calf mortality from multiple sources, tagging elk calves and monitoring their fates. And the compromise we came up with was let's use vaginal implant transmitters in elk cows, which is something that meets a few management objectives and research interests of the region related to disease and other issues. To document in detail the parturition calving areas used by the Clark or the Cody elk herd. And that will help us greatly to evaluate this question about the feasibility of studying sources of elk calf mortality, because we know a lot about migration, but we actually know very little about distribution of calving in any of these herds. I mean, at a very, how much of it is way out in the front country, way in the back country, on the migration itself, how that varies year to year. And so as a first step, we're doing that this summer, and we'll be able to use that.
Maybe I missed it in your studies. There is a parturition aspect to that.
There is in the Cody study. I just didn't.
The Jackson stuff.
No, those are focused on winter ecology of the Jackson elk herd.
There's hybrid. It doesn't work. Just kick me next.
The question, grizzly bear stuff's a lot easier.
Commissioner, questions in the Jackson elk herd, and as you probably know, in the Grogon and elk refuge have a lot to do with the movements and behavioral decisions made by elk in the winter. So that's why we're more focused in that component on documenting patterns of risk from the primary predator in the winter, and then adding that to snow conditions and other factors that could influence the movement of elk on that in that zone. And so there's a sort of a seasonal focus there that means that bears aren't a factor so much. And it's not that mountain lions are not a factor, but they're much less. I think I'm safe saying there's like 6 mountain lions or something in the areas that we're talking about. Probably getting that wrong, but they're.
So low density lions, but elk is the primary prey of lions.
I think it's a fair request on Pat's part. What I'm getting is combine these also, grizzly and wolf goes together on these elk herds. Is that right, Pat?
But I'd be interested.
I think that's a good.
What I heard that is important to the health of the herd, but if we can't do it, we can't do it.
Well,
I think it can be done in the future.
So, Mr. President and members of the commission, I certainly don't mean to convey that we are not trying to do that today. And I'm probably I'm being too much of a scientist by telling you there's a lot that we need to work through before we get there. But it's extremely important, and we will take all of this discussion into account going forward.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, Director Nesbitt, thanks for we'll get Arthur back again in the future as he keeps developing this. And as Dan said, it's kind of an ongoing evaluation of a number of things. And so we can kind of keep that discussion going. I think for sake of brevity, we ought to move the agenda along, and we'll let Dan Thompson go ahead and take over if you guys are ready for that.
Thank you. Last talk of the day, we tried to make it. What's that? Oh, it should tell you which talk it is. There's security. All right. President Rael, Director Nesbitt, Commission. My name is Dan Thompson. Brian DeBolt and I are going to kind of tag team this talk today. Just kind of an overview of large carnivore monitoring, research, and management, and conflict activities over the past year. So the role of Wyoming Game Fish is the same when it comes to large carnivores as all other wildlife. We are mandated to maintain viable populations of these species in the landscape. And of course, conserving wildlife, serving people, that is our motto. And especially when it comes to animals such as large carnivores, including public desires and attitudes is pivotal in moving forward in the management and conservation of the species. With these animals, managing and mitigating conflict is pivotal as well. And providing that information and education on this is all very well interconnected. So there is a wide spectrum of viewpoints on these animals, and it's unfortunately very dichotomized in certain species, especially wolves, from somewhere between like omniscient idolatry and raw visceral hatred. We kind of go for in the middle for these animals, but there is a spectrum of that, and we use that. It's very epitomized here in Park County, but we realize that going. So we're going to talk about this, and it was all day. A very key theme has been collaboration. And one thing that Dr. Western said that I wrote down actually is that collaboration is focused on the wicked things. And so some could argue maybe that's some of the things that we deal with. But everything we do is very much connected. So our conflict program informs how we understand and monitor and research and manage these animals. Our monitoring better understands how we can do better with conflict. And at the end, at the foundation of it is our education and outreach program in Bearwise, Wyoming. It's very much a team approach. It's a team approach between our large carnivore section and all the other game and fish employees in the regions, and interagency approach as well. And I'm going to talk a lot about that. So I'm going to go over the 4 large carnivore species that we deal with in the state. So mountain lions, black bears, wolves, and grizzly bears. For mountain lions and black bears, we do not enumerate the total number for the population. Rather, we look at trend, and we use harvest to look at that trend. But we also are looking at other ways to better understand them. Wolves and grizzly bears are obviously more involved because they have been or are federally listed as a species that is either threatened right now for grizzly bears, wolves, but because of that, there's a lot more things that we have to demonstrate, so we have a lot more activity with those. And again, it's very important to stress that these animals are not managed like ungulates. They're not managed like deer or elk, and that's okay. They're very much different life histories, densities, and roles in the ecosystem. So I'm going to start with mountain lions. Mountain lions are the most cryptic of these animals that we deal with. It's not a matter of going out and counting cats. You can't do flights. We've tried, but you can't do flights to enumerate mountain lions, even if you're using tracks. We're still working on some infrared. But again, we're continually evaluating new tools that we can use in conjunction with our harvest data to better understand what's going on. So in Green River region right now, we have a project that we're working on for several years now where we are capturing and marking animals. And this provides insight, this fine scale data just like Arthur was talking about and like Commissioner Crank was talking about, this fine scale data allows us to, number one, to better understand mountain lion habitat. So this habitat map was in our 2006 mountain lion management. You can see there's big chunks missing. And so when I came on board, we were able to do a statewide habitat map because the quantification of habitat is what drives our understanding of their density. A lot of this was not based on fine scale data, especially in this area. That information that we've collected over the past several years allowed us to very well quantify habitat in this area. And then if you plot our harvest data over it, you can see it really maps it well. Again, that's better informing our management. We're using GPS clusters in the Green River region to evaluate predation there as well. I talked about this last year. I've got a little more information. What's interesting, we've got, it's a small sample size, but there's not a high density of mountain lions. And so we're looking at, and we're doing our cluster analysis a little different. We have several models that Justin Clapp has worked to identify the best way to actually go to kill versus the non-kill. But if you look at these numbers, it's pretty industry standard for deer and elk depending on the system. But what's of interest is we're picking up pronghorn. We're picking up a fairly high percentage of coyote kills in these mountain lion predation, and then badger, beaver, a lot of these other things as well. So there's some interesting dynamics going on. And if you start putting all the pieces together, obviously coyotes are a neonate predator of mule deer. And so it actually informs a lot of the things that are going on. This is our gratuitous kitten picture. So we've also documented 3 of those females had kittens. We were able to go in and actually capture those kittens. And we put an ear tag in them to start. We will follow up. 2 of those females are still, we just recollared them 2 weeks ago. We will follow up and we're able to capture those kittens and understand into their independent stage, dispersal, where do they go, things like that. And this was actually on that show Yellowstone Live. Black Hills, we've been working in the Black Hills for multiple years using this biomarker site. It's kind of like catch and release mountain lion hunting, where you tree a cat and you shoot it with a dart, you get a tissue sample. We initiated in 2011 and 13 and determined it was a viable technique to get a point-in-time estimate. South Dakota is currently doing this as their primary form of monitoring the population. We've been assisting with that for the past several years. This year, Luke Ellsbury, who's got some of the best hounds in the state, was over there with our crew, with his crew, and marked 24 individual mountain lions in less than 3 weeks, which is a new record. That's a lot of time. And then again, you're going to see me focusing on collaboration. The work that we're doing in Green River is part of the Deer Elk Ecology Research Program. This is a coyote that was killed by mine. So you see former Commissioner Anselmi, Kevin Monteith, Matt Hayes, and Kate Hugler there. We're part of those projects. I'm on the grad committee for both of them, actually. So again, it's very much a collaborative effort to better understand these animals. And our background in research and management also helps their research objectives. So I already talked about this, but again, I'm trying to demonstrate how all of this is used for us to better manage these refinements and habitat mapping, the spatial dynamics, the understanding of how mountain lions are living in the landscape is incorporated into our annual assessment. We do things on a 3-year cycle, which we will be at this year. So we will be revisiting mountain lion harvest this July, to be in front of you, and all this information is used to inform that. And then as you were talking about, we're looking at multiple prey, multiple predator systems, more insight into these and the predation rates and things like that allows us to better understand ever-changing dynamics. As Arthur mentioned, it is unique that we have this intact carnivore gill, ungulate gill that we have. I'm not going to talk a lot about wolves because Ken Mills will be here next month to give you an annual status update. But again, for the new commissioners especially, we kind of had a yo-yo back and forth on wolf management, delisting, relisting, delisting. And so we did regain management authority. We developed harvest regulations and implemented wolf hunting the last 2 years. And the big thing is that in the time zone between when we had management authority, lost it, and regained it, there wasn't active monitoring. So we kind of had to start, there was some monitoring, but not much. Now we have a representative sample. We can use that information. can use that information again to enumerate the pack size. Wolves we can catch them, we can see them from the air, we can get really close counts on these animals. That allows us to use those annual net numbers to actually direct those harvest and management objectives. This is last year's number, but you'll be getting an update on this at the next commission. But honestly, when it comes to wolves, and arguably, I think most ungulate managers wish they had the confidence in the numbers we have for wolves because of the way we can track. This winter, we've got an additional 47 wolves collared in 23 packs throughout with that 47, we got a few more going out. I don't know off the top of my head. We try to keep at least one in every pack. We've got additional wolves in packs now because of Arthur's 2 research projects. And so it's more on the packs that we look at. So we've got 23 packs collared. Some of those have multiple within those packs. So I think we're at 57, 58. And just to give you an idea, again, this is where the important thing is we have to demonstrate recovery. As you can see, we've been well above recovery for multiple years. Whether they're hunted, whether they're not, we're maintaining a recovered population and using that as a minimum. And again, as Arthur mentioned, we're very heavily working with UC Berkeley on these 2 projects. We're literally sending 4 to 5 of our guys a week to Jackson to investigate clusters because there's several feet of snow on the ground. They're just challenging. And we've also been dealing with clusters. We can assist them as they're learning as well. So it's a learning process for everybody. Again, I mentioned this before. We have really good numbers for these wolves. I'm not just saying that to say it. I wouldn't do that. We can, the way wolves are, they're visual from the air. We have collars in the packs. We can see the tracks on the ground. We can get really good numbers. That allows us to really be close to our management objectives. And also we realize there is such scrutiny on wolf management, all carnivore management, especially wolves and grizzly bears. There's very international and national scrutiny on everything. And this fine scale movement data is going to be very beneficial for both the studies going on, but also we put some GPS collars out in Whiskey Mountain to better understand those dynamics with the sheep there that was brought up last year. So we can use that fine scale movement to better our understanding of those relationships between wolves and their prey. So black bears, we've seen a growing interest in black bear hunting and just interest in black bears in general as we've seen black bear populations. Western Bear Foundation is based out of Cody here. They're very interested in it. They have a very active group. Again, we use harvest trends to understand what's going on with black bears. But we're also working to quantify local black bear populations through this DNA hair snare technique. So basically, it's a non-invasive technique, and I got some slides that better understand it, that'll allow you to better understand it. But it allows us to get a snapshot of the density and time of an area, and we can systematically go back every 5 years or so, or however we want to, and see if that's changed through time, if that's matching what our harvest objectives have been, or what the data is telling us from. We started this out in the Grays River, and tested the technique. Based on those findings, we've alternate, and we just finished up work in Sierra Madres last. So basically what you do, you can see the barbed wire here. We've got a hanging a scent. And this is stretched between multiple trees. The bear goes under, snags his hair, and there we get a DNA scent. And so we can use that to get an overall representative mark of the population, and any bears that are harvested that come in, it's a mark recapture, and we can get a density for that particular area. And then we can do it by hunt area or a BMU, bear management. And then again, we can revisit that periodically. So it gives us an idea. So the Grays River was the first one we did. That was after the harvest was increased substantially. And so we would expect a lower density in some areas. Now, obviously, we're not going to have densities like they have in the east. But we're going to be able to do this through time. If we build this through time, we'll increase our understanding. Again, the results will be used. We'll be setting black bear seasons next winter. We'll have the Sierra Madre data available for next winter. It provides local managers that insight, and again, it's very collaborative. We get the regional people to help. The Western Bear Foundation donated $20,000 to put out collars for this summer. And then we can start building in, as we tweak these methodologies, we can start looking at what other things influence black bear density. Seasonal, weather, habitat pattern. We know they're driven by natural food fluctuations. And so that allows us to better understand that. It's a lot of interesting work. I think they estimated over 900 miles on foot last year to check these hair snares. It's fun catching the bears, but going out and picking off hair off of a barbed wire fence isn't nearly as fun, especially if you've done a lot of barbed wire work. So grizzly bear monitoring. Again, this is another unique situation in that we went back and forth, but we're still committed to maintaining a recovered population moving forward and back to state management, as Director Nesbitt mentioned earlier. I snuck that in, Commissioner Ayala. So President Ayala was with our crew last year when they were trapping up in Sunlight Crandall and actually trapped 3 bears in one day. So again, we try to maintain a representative sample throughout the system to try to understand what's going on with that population. One thing we're focused on now is trying to come up with a more accurate population estimate. We know we've been underestimating the population, and as we move forward, we need to have that accurate population estimate, as well as a better assessment of trend, if we can. And again, every animal that we handle provides a wealth of information on everything that's going on with that bear, which informs us on the overall population. So last year was a very busy year for grizzly bears for a management perspective. You'll remember last winter, you directed us to develop harvest regulations. We went through that. We developed hunting seasons. The commission adopted those last summer. We did a round of very productive meetings with the public regarding these. It's a contentious, controversial issue, but if we can have a successful grizzly bear hunting meeting in Jackson or Cody, I think we can do just about anything as a game and fish agency, because there's a lot of passion with these things, but it was handled very well by the public. We went through, we drew licenses. We actually conducted part of our regulations were mandatory training and orientation. We conducted that, hunting and orientation training, I should say. We conducted that last fall. We had a lot of turnout, a lot of interest in it. It was a fun way to interact with the people who were licensed and have them learn about bears as well. So there's a lot of great accomplishments with one major setback I'm pretty sure most of you are aware of. On September 24th, Judge Danny Christensen decision placed the GWA grizzly bear population back on the endangered species list as a threatened population. Therefore, we lost the ability to hunt, but it also, again, threw those grizzly bears back on the threatened population list. And quite honestly, there's a different tolerance from a lot of the public because of that now. And so, with that, we'll switch to the corn mazes and cornfields in Park County and let Ryan talk a little bit about conflict management.
Thank you, Dan. President Rael, members of the commission, and Director Nesbitt, appreciate you having me up here. Again, as Dan said, I'm just going to talk about the conflict portion of 2018 and maybe a little bit beyond. But I can't talk about all the work that's done and all the data that's collected, as Dan mentioned, without not only everybody in the large carnivore section, but all our regional biologists, wardens, and supervisors. The tremendous amount of work that goes into this is it's pretty phenomenal to collect all this data, and we couldn't do it with all the help without all the help that we get from those folks. So human wildlife conflicts with large carnivores, our objective is, mostly to educate people on how to reduce conflicts. High numbers of conflicts are something we don't want to see. We're trying to reduce that, of course. But we have to document the bona fide damage that does occur, no matter what that is. Human safety is paramount, and we just want to assess what these trends are over time. So we, excuse me, past the slide there. So, of course, annual conflict numbers vary, and that variation influences in the numbers of conflict from year to year. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what that is. You know, it's mostly due to annual variations in seasonal food abundance, annual food abundance. And to some degree, as Dan just mentioned, the social tolerance of folks at any given time. And that could dramatically be changed, for example, by a court decision. So when we look at our annual numbers, we do see an increasing trend, and I'll show you those. But without a doubt, you know, all science and data shows that what's causing that increase in trend is expanding populations of all these large carnivores that we have in the state. And Commissioner Crank pointed that out with bears moving east, you know, especially into the Bighorn Basin and whatnot. That's just one example. So we'll get right into some of the data, and I know you have this in front of you. Most of our black bear conflicts this last year were site conflicts related to garbage, whether it was secured or unsecured. Black bears seeking out what we call anthropogenic foods, you know, human-related foods, mostly garbage. So they also killed some sheep, which they do pretty regularly, and dog food and bird seed, which is almost always unsecured, is about the next primary reason we get a phone call for black bears being around people's homes. And then, of course, they get into beef farms, which we basically classify as livestock in the state. It's part of our compensation program. We relocate or remove about, 50%. Half the black bears that we catch, we end up relocating, and about half, frankly, we end up removing from the population, either because, pretty severe property damage, or they've been relocated in the past, whatever the case-by-case situation is there. So with wolf conflicts, I think you have in front of you, the number is 71. It's almost all cattle, but we did have a little change in those. Frankly, we just had some data points that were wrong, so it dropped it down. It's only at 65 total wolf conflicts, but really close to what you got in front of you. So management actions, which includes wildlife services under our direction or our agency removal, we basically removed 27 wolves in the trophy game management area in response to those conflicts. And again, most of it's just when it gets to the point where wolves are killing enough cattle, we've got to go in and remove some. Sometimes 1 or 2 wolves removed from the pack will do it. Sometimes it's 4, 5, 6. It's a pretty significant number of wolves out of a given pack to try to alleviate that depredation that's going on that given year. Mountain lion conflicts, again, although it's pretty standard, they just kill sheep. That's what they get into. And then, of course, the guard animals that are trying to protect those sheep, llamas, and dogs, get attacked occasionally. And then on down the line, you can see there we have a few different types of conflicts. One thing I will note, though, we are seeing a slight increase. I was looking through the data about the past 10 years in some aggressive lions. We're having at least more aggressive lion encounters. People hunting, people calling, for elk and whatnot, and having lions approach them. And those lions, being killed in self-defense or something. We're seeing it's a real small data set, but we're starting to see a little increase in that. And I suppose, again, that's a function of, just like I said earlier, we're seeing an increase in all these large carnivores across the state. So, grizzly bears, been a real hot topic today. We documented 244 different bona fide grizzly bear conflicts. About 60% of that, which was 150 conflicts, were a direct result of grizzly bears killing cattle. So that was the overwhelming majority of conflicts that we had this year with grizzly bears. We did have an extremely unfortunate incident where a man was killed by a grizzly bear this year and another man was injured in the same incident. So that, of course, is tragic, and we never like to have that show up. We have a lot of removals this year. That's a function of, frankly, we caught a lot of bears outside the DMA, outside of suitable habitat, and again, just no suitable relocation sites for those bears, or a lot of the bears that we caught were repeat offenders. So they were removed. We had a high number of removals this year. We had 32 bears that we removed from the ecosystem as a result of those conflicts. But with that being said, I know this graph's kind of busy, but total conflicts, that line at the top, total conflicts of all large carnivore species is pretty much driven by, the number of grizzly bear conflicts. That's definitely what we're seeing. The same line, the juxtaposition of that line across time is pretty equivalent to what we see with grizzly bear conflicts. So, and that black line is just the trend line of grizzly bear conflicts here over time, over the past 10 years anyway, to kind of see, that increasing trend that we're observing. So what I wanted to show you with this, though, is the gap between the number of grizzly bear conflicts that we see and the number of, let's say, bears that we actually capture. Those are what folks do every single day on the ground with prevention and education. That's the majority of the work that we do. We get a report of a conflict no matter what it is. Again, our last resort is to have to track that bear and relocate it or remove it. And so all that work that's done in prevention and education, I'll give you some examples of those here. And this, I'm just going to run through a quick little set of slides. This is decade by decade, the number of conflicts that we're dealing with in Wyoming, as far as grizzly bears go. So here's 1980 to 1990. You can see the distribution of grizzly bear conflicts. And then the next decade, 91 to 2000, 2001 to 2010, and basically, here to present. So the distribution of those conflicts, as you can see, is increasing eastward and southward as grizzly bears move in that direction. And we're not seeing like a decrease in conflicts in the core. The core of the ecosystem is still full of bears. We still got a high density of bears there, but they got nowhere to live. So as the population grows, they expand outside of those areas. And unfortunately, it's into a lot of unsuitable habitat. There's nothing but Russian olives and cattle that's available for these bears to eat in a lot of these places. And that's why we're seeing a lot of those conflicts. So, I guess I'm done. No. Overall trends in conflicts, again, are increasing. And you guys have it in front of you. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is where you can see that the overall trend in conflicts by all large carnivores is kind of mirrored by the number of grizzly bear conflicts. So our prevention and education program, I'm going to run through just some quick examples of what we do in 1 year. Dan's going to talk about it a little more extensively. But for example, we put this up, it's called FLAG. And that frankly keeps wolves out. It's pretty amazing. They do become adapted to it over time, but it's a short-term preventative technique, on maybe a smaller calving pasture. You can throw this stuff around, and it's a visual deterrent, and of course it flutters in the wind, and it's been proven pretty effective to keep wolves out of, let's say, calving pasture over short term. So one thing that we do. Another thing that Dusty was paramount in doing was getting the Cody landfill fence. We're seeing more grizzly bears come into the Cody landfill again as part of that expansion. But pretty major electric fence around the whole thing. We had grizzly bears sitting in beehives in Missouri Valley there west of Riverton. Again, part of that expansion. So we put up electric fence around beehives, which again is nothing new, but we're doing it in new places now. So Zach built this charge and bear, which is really pretty neat. He's got it built on them runners, and the kids or whoever can practice drawing and shooting their bear spray. They're a inert bear spray. This charge and bear, and it's been a really good learning tool for folks. But we also use it, to train other agencies. We're not picky who we train. Anybody that wants to learn about how to stay safe in bear country and what to do in a bear encounter, we will spend that time doing. So in that prevention education. And on a daily basis, there's nothing we won't do. You know, the one on the top, you know, a guy calls and he says, I don't have a bear-proof dumpster, but I don't really use it. I only have a couple bags of trash. So we had an old Game and Fish truck toolbox, you know, in the lot in the back of the Lander office. So we threw a couple latches on it, delivered it to him, and that's what he uses to keep bears out of his trash now. Or if we don't have resources like that available, we use whatever's in the back of the truck, you know, fence posts and straps, just to keep bears out. So you don't have to trap bears. You can, you know, secure that, attract, and prevent having to deal with the bear. Destructive stimuli, you know, we put up these balloon men, these scary balloon men, and that works on both bears and wolves, you know, around cabin pastures or different things. Again, we're open to thinking outside the box and doing whatever we can to prevent the conflict from occurring in the first place. We're actually looking into, which we'll be updating you later, many jurisdictions across the West, including Alaska, across the United States, actually, have been using tasers. You know, we're thinking specific to bears, and it's a great aversive conditioning tool. We are looking into that as a potential use, you know, especially with the black bears hanging around on somebody's porch, won't leave. There's been some really good success with going and tasing this wildlife, and they just don't come back. You don't have to drug them, you don't have to trap them, you don't have to relocate them. It's been a really good negative stimulus for them. So we're looking into it again, just another tool in the toolbox. Of course, the big picture, the long-term picture, is looking at, you know, securing habitats for these critters. Again, that's insuitable habitat to just prevent the conflict from happening in the first place. You know, working with the Fish and Wildlife Service, trying to keep these species under state management where it should be is the long-term goal, what we can do. And so anything that we can do to educate the folks, secure the habitats that are already there, will be beneficial long-term to again, keeping people safe and just maintaining these critters on the landscape long-term. Another part of the program that we just dealt with, of course, with the damage claim appeal, is our compensation program. It's a pretty liberal compensation program. It's not a perfect program, but you know, it's a tremendous part of what we do, and we try to compensate landowners to some extent for all their efforts and all the work that they have done to help maintain, you know, these carnivores on the landscape, but yet not ruin them financially, you know, because this public resource, specifically grizzly bears and wolves, is having an impact on them financially. And what does that cost on us? Well, it's quite a bit. You can see there the number of grizzly bear and wolf damage claims definitely are the majority of what we pay out in our livestock compensation program in the state. So I don't have to get into the specific numbers here, but you can just see it adds up to quite a bit. And again, that's all, you know, part of long-term conservation and social tolerance and acceptance of these critters on the landscape without ruining people financially. So when all of our options are exhausted, again, we try. Yes. Yes, sir.
The grizzly bear, obviously now when it gets back on the news, we are spending a tremendous amount of money on these bears for the public of the United States. And those numbers are getting bigger and bigger. I personally would like to see some way, somehow, Wildlife Services or somebody else starts picking up some of for their bears as well. Whether it be some of these claims to the landowner or the cost of going out and capturing. I guess I'd like to bring that up to the public. It's something that we have to deal with because of the court system.
The Game and Fish and the landowners and the sportsmen have blood, sweat, and tears and dollars poured into the successful recovery of these critters on the landscape for the benefit of a lot of folks. And yeah, it would definitely be.
It is successful. It's been successful, extremely successful, and that's why we're seeing this. It's frustrating to me to look at that and see how much money the sportsmen are continuing to pay for not only compensating losses but for management of them. We're not necessarily, we don't want to get rid of them. We'd like to have some more control, but I would like to see, and I know it's not something you can answer. I would like to see us put some more pressure if we can on the feds to help start doing something.
Yeah, and as you're aware, that funding does come from a fund that was established through basically hunting dollars.
When you're talking about the non-lethal method, do we collaborate with a number of the organizations that are on the other side of the spectrum, as you pointed out, that are trying to develop such of these things? Are we collaborating with them on those types of things? I mean, I've heard about callers that like dog whistle type sound, right? How does that?
Yeah, you know, all those things cost money. Absolutely. And so we search for any funding source possible. And I will admit, we have worked with a lot of different groups and agencies whose ultimate goals are different than ours. But if we can work together to say, you know, help a rancher stop or reduce the depredation that they're experiencing on a cabin pasture in a given year with some dollars that they may be able to help provide, we will do that. Yes, even though our ultimate goals may be different long term. Yeah, we definitely work with folks, and we're willing to collaborate on any of those projects when necessary, for sure. So, but again, the big buy-in there is from those folks experiencing that damage. They're the ones that deserve the credit for allowing this big invasive. Yeah, we're going to put out flaggery and electric fences and these, you know, obtrusive bear boxes and garbage cans on your property, and we're going to be in and out. And they're the ones that deserve a lot of the credit for you know, the success of that prevention program.
Right.
Yes.
You know, to Pete's point there, that's been a conversation for a little while now. And I would just like to add that we might want to be careful what we wish for there too. I think we need to really think about that. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Well, I'd like to think that we don't want somebody else to take the bull by the horns and the bristles, throw away everything that we've done. And that could happen if somebody else spoke. I think that would happen.
Wildlife services, they're the ones that basically dictate whether or not we location or replicating bears or putting them down. Is that not correct?
Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah, the Fish and Wildlife Service has the ultimate decision, you know, under the listed status of the grizzly bear on what happens.
So that currently happens right now.
Yes. Yes.
I'm sure the answer is that there are wildlife population on the face of the earth. You set aside waterfowl, but there can be a wildlife population on the face of the earth that has been studied. As grizzly bears have since what, 1973?
Not that I'm aware of, frankly, Commissioner Frank.
Arguably the Starkey elk herd. Arguably the Starkey elk herd has been studied for decades, but it's definitely one of the most studied populations as well.
So, yeah, with all the money, the time, the effort put into it, managing all these large carnivores, you know, our last resort is to catch a bear. If we can prevent the conflict from occurring in the first place, that's our ultimate goal. But we do have to relocate you know, bears and lions, for example, and we do have to remove those critters. That's the reality. And again, you got both extremes where some groups may want every one of these critters removed and some want none. And so that's where we're in the middle. So, you know, evaluating the overall conflict management model, you know, again, new tools. We're always trying to look for new tools, mostly to benefit people, because frankly, the carnivores are doing really well. You know, we're analyzing whatever changes are occurring as a result of our relocation program, and is it effective? You know, maybe with low densities of bears, relocation is pretty effective, but with the extremely high density of bears that we're seeing, maybe not so much anymore. So we're looking at that. Our predator attack team, of course, is part of our conflict management program. And again, unfortunately, we had to use that this year on a human fatality as a result of a grizzly bear attack. But we have a really good program in place, and you know, unfortunately, is probably going to be used more and more. And with that, unless you have any other questions for me, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Thompson.
Excuse me, you mentioned 37 bears removed?
32.
32. And when you say remove the ecosystem, they were euthanized?
So when we talk about removal, these happen to all be lethally removed. Yep, but occasionally we do a live removal to a zoo or whatever. That may be the case. But it's removed from the population. They're not coming back. So it's considered a mortality. And yeah, so removals.
So for the record, we were shut down on a 24 bear limit, I guess, quota by Judge Christensen or Judge Christensen. Is that right? That's correct. And euthanized 32.
That's correct. So there's definitely, you know, a portion of those bears that we ended up having to spend the time and effort removing that could have been available for harvest.
One more question. Anybody ever taken this?
Yes, actually not in Wyoming. No, Larry Lewis out of Alaska has done quite a bit of research on tasing grizzly bears.
Is it still alive?
So yeah. So,
Ask us that next year.
yeah, well, next year, I don't know if we'll be at that point or not. But we'll see. That'll be your next field trip.
Thanks for all you do, buddy.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. Well, I just kind of want to wrap up with talking about, as I mentioned before, the foundation for large carnivore management, which is education and outreach. Dusty Laster, who you met earlier today, heads up our Bearwise Wyoming program. These proactive efforts, along with all the different tools that we have that we employ to manage and mitigate conflicts and manage the carnivores, are how we move forward for the proper conservation and management of these animals on land. Bearwise Wyoming is an ever-evolving process that started here on the North Fork, as shown. It's a community outreach program. It's grown from there. It's very successful. You build a lot of support when the public has the ownership. When the public has ownership of it and increases tolerance, and they're part of that recovery, it's a very much more successful program. We go around, we talk to everybody who will listen. We have a lot of kids programs, and quite honestly, everyone in our section is involved in this, and throughout the Game Fish. One day you're elbow deep in blood and guts and a calf, the next day you're talking to kids, and the next day you're giving a lecture at the University of Wyoming. It's a very well-faceted group of people, and everybody's expected to be able to do the job of everybody else in our section. But again, this is a really good chance to we start young, but we go throughout the spectrum of people that will listen. There's a lot of teaming up. You mentioned earlier, we do here in Clark County, there's a bear spray giveaway every year. There's money donated from Wyoming Outdoorsmen, from the Western Bear Foundation. We got money for the landfill from GYC. So there's an opportunity to team up with these and do things that are better for bears. Western Bear Foundation has done a lot to put in bear boxes and actually get out and get dirty with it. That's a bear spray giveaway in Jackson. And again, we try to provide as much information as we can. Brian mentioned last year was an extremely unfortunate year in the sense that we had 4 human injuries and 1 fatality. And those are the absolute worst days of our jobs as when a person is. It's a reality of it some days, and we don't ever want it to happen, but sometimes it does. And Brian's very humble. That predator attack team is a well-oiled machine. They dealt with that fatality better than could have been dealt with. It was very smooth from start to finish, and the proper resolution occurred in the end. There's Mike Boyce. He actually lost it, but that kind of stretches his mind. That's just an example of being able to show this stuff to kids. This is a charging bear. You know, it gets people involved and excited about doing this. Experience, and it's a community-based experience. We go throughout the communities, members of the community, people enjoy seeing this. We've updated our website. We have some very talented people in Cheyenne and that Rebecca supervises and that can do stuff that it's like the Matrix to me, but they can do amazing things. And to get that information out to all different members of the public, different generational members and things like that. And in the end, it's a quote from Da Vinci, but again, I talked about it earlier. Everything that we do is connected, and you know, we find it out as wildlife managers. We start talking about, we compartmentalize things, and you lose in the end. You know, these animals, they're preying on the ungulate species that we manage as well. The things that we do from an educational standpoint might reduce conflict. Everything is very interconnected, especially with carnivores and the public interest we have. Again, we're committed to maintaining and managing these animals on the landscape in the future. We will always have an extremely vigilant conflict resolution program and monitoring and education program. Again, we're always asking those relevant questions, and we're heavily involved with academic research and those collaborative efforts across the board as we move forward. And we're always trying to get an idea on the public sentiment when it comes down to these animals. And that's Luke coming on the Deer Creek.
And you guys do a great job. I absolutely.
My job's pretty easy. I got a ton of great people that work for us. So that makes it pretty easy.
Mr. President? Yes. I got a question for you. It's referring to black bears. Looks like we take about 450 or so black bears a year. Is that good? Does that reach we have harvest data that we'd like to see every year?
Yeah, and we're going to be revisiting that this winter. We've seen it's very sustainable. We've seen an increased interest in black bear hunting, but we've also seen some expansion of black bear populations, and so I think it's very sustainable. The questions we deal with are regards to what level of density you want in certain areas. You know, the conflicts with black bears, as Brian mentioned, are more driven by local food sources, and when they get in trouble, we might have a drought year or something, we get in trouble, and that's not necessarily tied to harvest. But no, harvest is very sustainable, and we're seeing some really nice black bears come out of the state.
I mean, would the department want to see that harvest higher? For any reason is that we're projected to be higher on a black bear harvest?
It depends on what our harvests, our population trends are. Yeah, if there are ample opportunity and we're not going to be negatively impacting the population from a sportsman's perspective, absolutely. We want to maximize that, just like anything else, maximize that opportunity without negatively impacting.
Do we know where that number is?
I'll know a lot better next fall. Because we'll analyze, so we do mountain lions and black bears on a 3-year cycle. which allows us to much better evaluate trend. And we'll come with you based on meeting with the regions and the public, what kind of harvest numbers that we would like to see for the next 3 years. And that'll be something we talk about in December. Or no, January. So.
Thank you.
And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That will probably close now, and we will have one more call to the public. I don't have any blue sheets. Nobody's getting blue sheets, so I assume we don't have any. With that being said, I guess we'll.
I move that we adjourn.
Okay, it's moved by Commissioner Frank that we adjourn, and seconded by Galenberg, Commissioner Galenberg. Just an announcement real quick.
Yeah.
At the Cody Auditorium, there's a meet and greet, and if you have children, we encourage you to bring your children. So this will be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's really an opportunity for the community to meet with their commission, and there'll also be be able to give away some lifetime licenses for kids.
I guess the commission, but I view it as personally as meeting red shirts. It's a big opportunity to meet folks from Cheyenne that don't get up here very often. So, anyways, that being said, we'll see you there, I hope.
Yeah, it starts now, and we'll draw around probably 6:15, 6:30.